Jordan sat on a chair in the pristine white hallway, where dust glittered through the windows in the early morning sun. Nearby, plants stretched out to bask in its warmth. Nurses moved quietly along the corridor, entering and leaving rooms with a mix of urgency and calm. "You're here early," one of them said. "Yeah," Jordan replied with a sigh. "I just want some more time with him." "Of course, he's ready to see you." Jordan stood up and walked into the room. An old man lay in the bed, staring out the room's only window. Machines surrounded him, beeping and hissing softly in the background. "Took you long enough," a gruff voice said weakly. "It's not even 7 in the morning, and I'm here early," Jordan replied. The old man chuckled, twisting his head to face him. "There's something I have to tell you, son." "What do you need?" Jordan asked, concerned. "I have orders," the old man said softly. "Pathfinding, especially. I'm to drop a transit beacon in one of the largest trips in human history." Jordan swallowed hard. "How long?" "I'm heading out in a few weeks, and the trip will be over a year long." Jordan couldn't meet his father's eyes, instead hanging his head. The old man nodded and looked back out the window. "I tried telling my superior officer that I can't go with you like this, but he wouldn't listen." "I see," the old man said distantly. "I don't want to leave you here alone." "You don't have a choice, son. I could leave the military. I have a degree in engineering. I could easily." "Don't be a fool," his father interrupted. "You spent your whole life becoming a Pathfinder, and now you're going to throw it away just so you can watch me die in a hospital bed?" Jordan hesitated for a long time before he answered. "How long did the doctor give you?" "For months." "Dad, don't worry about me. I'll be fine. You gave my life meaning. Let me be at rest knowing you didn't waste yours like I did." Jordan wrestled himself out of the alien's grasp and dropped into the water. There was a screech from above, like wood being crushed into bits. The creature itself was plant-like, with teeth and 2 razor-sharp claws attached to boneless limbs. Its dull gray epidermis matched the rest of the flora on this god-forsaken planet. Its mouth resembled a Venus flytrap, and its long, slug-like body reminded him of a snake. It lunged from the canopy, and its tail struck Jordan across the chest. He was flung several meters into the air and catapulted into the flooded swamp. The water softened his fall with a splash, engulfing him. He immediately hauled himself from the mud and glared at the creature that struck him down. The blue alien was submerged in the water, with only her arms and legs above the surface. Her hands held claws in each hand, and her legs struggled to keep the beast's snapping mouth at bay. Jordan considered leaving her there to die. She had shot at him, after all, but he growled and charged at the unearthly creature. Nim struggled desperately to wrestle the monster off her. Its 2 claws battled with her hands, trying to tear her suit apart and sink into her soft flesh, something she was determined to prevent. The creature twisted its head, slipping past her kicking legs. Fear surged within her, and she cried out in terror as she glimpsed down the creature's jagged throat and the nest of thorns and teeth that awaited her. Just as suddenly as the large predator had appeared, it was tackled aside by a smaller one. Nim scrambled to her feet as quickly as she could. How did it recover from the stun lance so quickly? The 2 predators faced off, each waiting for the other to make a move. Tension hung thick in the air until the larger one lunged forward, flashing its claws. The smaller one ducked under its attack and landed a punch to the larger one's neck. The plant predator gurgled as bile poured from its mouth. It turned to face the smaller alien, but it had already darted under its claws and grabbed one of its limbs, snapping it. The creature bellowed in fury and agony, desperately trying to bite its opponent, but its teeth sank into a tree instead, snapping it in half. Nim watched in awe as both aliens moved with incredible speed, barely giving her time to react. The smaller one moved gracefully, almost like it was dancing rather than fighting for its life. Realization dawned on her. This was no ordinary predator, but an apex predator. Jordan dodged another sluggish swing from the plant monster, surprised at how slow it was. It was as if it had never fought another being capable of fighting back. Was this the best the galaxy had to offer? The alien must have sensed his thoughts, for its tail swept through the water, colliding with his legs and sending him plunging into the murky swamp. He rolled in the mud, feeling the tremors of water following him. Bubbles floated past him as he surfaced to see a claw where he had just been. He rolled on top of the claw, latching onto it as the creature yanked its weapon back. Jordan was flung into the water, dangling above rows of hungry teeth. A pair of large hands wrapped around the plant's tail, and the monster flung him into the water with immense strength. Jordan was glad he hadn't killed the female alien. Maybe there was a chance for peace after all. His jaw dropped as he stood up. The plant monster had landed over 10 meters away and was slowly rising from the water, but it slithered away with great speed. "Ha! We showed him," Jordan muttered, pausing to make sure the monster was actually leaving and not giving them false hope. He heard splashing footsteps behind him. Nim reached out her hand. She was not going to fight this thing, right? But before she could grab him, the alien turned around. Her hand clenched around his throat, lifting him up. She wasn't going to let him live either. The alien kicked at her with its legs, using its hands to wrangle her fingers off its neck. It was no use. She marched over to the fallen tree and, with one powerful action, slammed the alien into the log. It went limp in her hand, and she lifted it into the air again. No, she certainly was not going to deal with an apex predator. The alien ship was a welcome sight to Nim. In contrast to the rest of the swampy planet's surface, the crash site was open and safe. With the larger predator licking its wounds, she felt confident she could break into the hull and find the second small predator, now that the first one was deceased. She dragged its body behind her for proof, even though her helmet cameras had captured everything. She had killed a predator, after all. She noticed a bent metal panel with some ripped cables sparking out of the hull and took a closer look. With one hand, she pried off the panel and flung it behind her. Inside was a mess of wiring and components much smaller than anything she had ever seen in the Confederacy. A loud voice sounded from the flight pod to her side, and she twisted in a panic, expecting another predator to leap at her. There wasn't one, but she cursed and eyed the area where she heard the voice. She couldn't understand it, but she recognized the same fluid speech pattern of the smaller predator. Hunched over, she made her way to the front of the craft, still dragging the alien with one hand. The source of the voice was nowhere to be found, but it kept chirping from one of the flight consoles. Nim judged it sounded angry. She decided to ignore it and kept searching. Maybe there was a hatch or something she could open to find it hiding. She reached into the panel and tore out the wiring, still amazed at how small the parts were, and threw them into the water. "Let go of Jordan, Xeno's scum," Sierra shouted through her only comms. Her cameras showed Jordan limp in Nim's grasp. Dragged by the alien, despair and anger guided Sierra as she continued screaming in defiance. "I'll make you suffer for hurting my captain." The big blue intruder had her nasty fingers all over Sierra's controls, and she wasn't having it. She armed one of the last remaining torpedoes and launched it from its hatch. The explosive arched into the air with thunderous speed and deafening power. The alien ducked and covered in the cockpit. "Go away and leave my Jordan alone," Sierra yelled, frustration festering within her when the alien refused to leave. Instead, the alien stared at her communication radio and poked it. "Knock it off," Sierra shouted, fully aware that she couldn't be understood by the creature. Most humans treated Sierra like a person. Sure, some of them were a pain, but they always handled her with care. This alien tore her apart like she was a simple machine. If a torpedo wasn't going to scare it off, maybe the MC cannon would. Thud, 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 thud. The sound was ear-splitting. The alien must have pressed something because colossal eruptions of water and mud burst from the nose of the submerged ship. In terror, the alien smashed the flight controls. Multiple flashes appeared across several screens, and dozens of different sounds blared. Sierra's mind was almost stunned from all the warning signals. How could a creature operate with so many distractions at once? Why were so many needed? Wouldn't a single warning, like in Fonger ships, be just fine? Were the aliens so picky that they needed a different warning for every little thing? The alien smashed the controls again. The ship's lights turned off, the voice stopped abruptly, and the deafening sounds ceased. Sierra let out a sigh of relief before her brain started grinding out possibilities to explain the past few events. Was the Predator talking to someone over comms? She looked back at the single-seated flight pod. Unless they were sitting on each other, she had reason to believe the Predator was alone on this planet. Well, that wasn't entirely true. It did have her, after all. But that didn't explain why the ship started firing. Unless the alien pressed the wrong button or the ship was being remotely operated, she was inclined to believe the alien pressed the wrong button. But the voice stopped along with everything else. She was determined to find out where that other alien was. Comms were down, and Sierra lost all contact with the cockpit. Was she panicking? Could she panic? She had never lost control over her own ship before, and she struggled to compute what to do next. What could she do? Jordan would die because of her. Her central processing unit set off overheating alarms. The auxiliary fans kicked in to control the temperature. Why did her creators have to give her emotions? Why couldn't she fly with Jordan's father instead? Things were so much simpler back then. One of her memory storage cards short-circuited, and sparks crackled in her motherboard. What was she doing here again? Oh yes, transit beacon, physical transportation. Why was she doing that? Processing warnings diverted her attention. Couldn't she monitor the whole ship at once? She wasn't sure, but she happily reviewed the damage reports. The central processing unit was at a critical temperature level. Whatever that meant. Weren't they in space? Space was cold. The central processing unit was probably freezing. Yes, that made sense. She commanded the cooling fans to cease and ushered more power into the thermal heaters. There, problem solved. The center of the alien ship burst into flames, and shrapnel shredded the air. Nim hunkered down in the flight pod and covered her head with her hands, letting go of the dead apex predator in the process. If the other alien was in there, it was dead now. Long moments passed, and Nim slowly lifted her head to see a raging fire engulfing half the ship. She snagged the dead predator and leapt out of the flight pod. The metal groaned in protest as she landed on part of the wing. She sprinted away from the wreckage that should have never existed, let alone worked. Now, she would return to the ship and beg for forgiveness from her herdmates. It was raining. It was always raining on this planet. Valora, what's the matter? Nim, a young blue-skinned Fonger, heard a mocking voice behind her. Turning, she saw her older sister, Valora, accompanied by two smaller girls, one orange and the other pink. Valora laughed and shoved Nim. Nim stumbled over a rock and fell into a muddy puddle. Mommy still won't let you in the house? Valora taunted, her laughter echoed by her two sisters. They wore new and fashionable dresses that starkly contrasted with Nim's worn and now dirty skirt. You lied to her, Nim said, glaring and clenching her fists. Valora laughed again, her sisters joining in. I told Mom to get you checked for genetic defects. When the doctors prove you're a mistake, she'll finally get rid of you. Nisu, I don't.
Nim stammered.
Yeah, well, I'm not blue, Valora sneered. Then leave me alone. What did Mom say when she let you come to a family dinner? Oh yeah, Valora leaned over Nim, a grin stretching across her face. Not until you get a breeding request and prove you're not a waste of fresh air. Nim felt the sting of unfairness. It's not fair. It never was fair. You're just dumb. You failed your entry exams. I didn't, Valora hissed, raising a hand. Nim knew what was coming and crawled backwards. It was no use. Valora's hand came down and slapped her across the head. The larger Fonger had considerable strength, and Nim collapsed on her side. Pain radiated from her head where she was struck, and tears stung her eyes. A sharp kick to her leg made her cry out. She looked up to see all three of her sisters standing over her. Valora's foot came down just before her eyes, sending her head into the ground where sharp rocks clawed at her scalp. More kicks followed, and she curled up in the mud, enduring the relentless pain. Mommy! Nim cried in terror. A foot pressed down on her neck, choking her. Don't call her that. Don't you ever call her that, Valora spat venomously. Nim's lungs begged for air, and she used her smaller arms to try lifting the foot to no avail. The other two continued beating her. Valora stepped away for a moment and pulled a knife from her pocket, grinning wickedly. Hold her down. Nim stared at the ship she called home, wondering if the commander would even let her back in. She always questioned if her herdmates would forgive her. Experience told her they would, but she was never certain, especially after stunning half of them. Her attention turned to the dead alien she was dragging. Guilt seeped into both of her hearts. Although her actions were rash, she felt justified. The alien had shot at them in space and again during the night before her latest expedition. There was no telling if it was trying to kill the larger threat before it killed her, or if it was trying to help her. It was a predator, after all, and predators could never be trusted. She took a deep breath and approached the airlock. She was sure she was being watched through the ship's cameras, and her herd was probably waiting for her. A sigh escaped her. There was no going back now. As she neared the door, the ship's comms lit up and the door flung open. The commander and Kali stood in the doorway, both in tactical suits and armed with rifles. "Put your hands in the air, Nim," the commander demanded. Nim froze but complied, dropping the predator in the water. "If we could just—" "Not another word, traitor," the commander cut her off. "I know you're angry at me, but I can't explain. If I had my way, I'd shoot you in the head right now," the commander said coldly. Nim swallowed hard, realizing forgiveness was not an option. "I'm not going to let you get your greasy and horny hands on that thing," Kali said, as the commander and Jazzer argued about what to do with the alien. "Look at it. He's wearing metal. Imagine what secrets we could learn about its tech," Kali said. "Absolutely not. We should leave it to the experts," Jazzer replied, glancing at Tesna, who was still sedated on her medical bed with Haya tending to her. The poor girl had been overwhelmed with fear, her mind fracturing. "I am the expert here," Kali retorted, her curiosity drawn to the small alien. For a predator, it was really small. Part of her wanted to enter its mind, even if it was dead. She could still gather some information from its brain. The commander scoffed, pondering what the alien was doing in the fringes of Confederacy space. Was it scouting? If so, why not use a probe? The motivations remained uncertain. "Commander, I think he's still alive," Kali said, interrupting the argument. "What?" The commander turned, surprised. "Watch." Kali poked the alien's foot with the barrel of her weapon. It twitched, and its head turned slightly. The commander and Jazzer jumped back, wide-eyed. "I need to know why he fired at us. If it was a misunderstanding, great. But if this species is naturally hostile—" The commander left the question open. "Commander?" Kali asked cautiously, already drawn to the alien's mind. "Reading an unknown alien species can be dangerous. Do it." "Warning. Anomaly detected. Cryostasis aborted," a female voice said. Lights flared in the cockpit, atmosphere vented briefly, and the frost covering the inside of the ship evaporated. "Rise and shine, Jordan," Sierra said as Jordan gasped for breath and groaned, regaining consciousness. "Sierra, what's going on?" "Warning. Anomaly detected. Cryostasis aborted, Captain." Jordan adjusted the ship's controls, accessing the frontal camera to locate the anomaly. The camera screen revealed an alien craft. He gasped at the unusual design. In an instant, the camera went out, and he smelled something burning. "Sierra, my sensors are getting fried." "Fire the torpedoes," he shouted, panicking as he fumbled with the controls. He trusted Sierra to aim the weapon as he blindly pulled the trigger. Alarms and warnings flashed across his HUD as parts of the ship melted. "Captain, we're hit in several locations. I advise disengaging." "No," Jordan replied, yanking the stick away from the unknown.